We're welcoming you back to Frontrunners 5.0. We have the honor to host Matthew Leopold, the board director at European Sponsorship Association and head of brand communication at LexisNexis. Mr. Leopold, and if he allows me to call him Matthew during the presentation, we'll discuss the effective measurement of sponsorship, a very hot and challenging simultaneously topic in the sports marketing literature and practice. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. It's lovely to be back with you all again, and apologies that I can't be with you in person. Maybe next year we can all get together, but it is lovely to be with you. So thank you for the introduction. As explained, I am a volunteer sitting on the board of the European Sponsorship Association. This is the association that brings together sponsorship professionals in brands, in rights holders, in support agencies, or agencies themselves to progress the best of sponsorship across all of Europe. And we do a huge amount of research and work and awards, and please do take the time to check it out. You might find that there's stuff of value there for you. But in terms of my career background, I was head of sponsorship at British Gas, which is one of the largest energy companies in the United Kingdom. Then across at Ring Central, which is a huge US unified communications technology company. And then now, as explained, working for LexisNexis, which is a legal intelligence provider. So quite a rich background of different brands involved in sponsorships in different ways in all of those different companies. So today I'm going to talk about measurement of sponsorship, and I think that there is a huge amount to cover, and this is only going to be a short presentation, so we're not going to be able to go into the depth. I'm just going to share my top level thoughts and views and experience on the mistakes that I've made and the mistakes that I've seen. So I'll talk a little bit about what I see the issue as, talk a bit about a measurement strategy, and then finally talk about the customer or the consumer, the client, because ultimately we have to put them at front of mind, and if we haven't got them at the front of mind, then nothing else works. So I think tragically that there is no golden bullet, okay, or silver bullet, so whatever we want to do. Everyone looks for that one magic number that is going to summarize or explain a sponsorship. And there is no single simple metric that can measure the effectiveness or the success of a sponsorship. And that's for a really simple reason. It's because sponsorship is exceptionally complex. No matter what sort of sponsorship you do, how you choose to activate it, it can do different things and achieve different results depending on where it's used, how it's used, or why it's used. So looking for one number that can be compared across all sponsorships, unfortunately, just does not work. So take, for example, there are many, many different types of sponsorship. So on the screen here, you can see we've got sports sponsorship, we've got charitable partnerships, we've got brand or commercial partnerships, we've got the arts and theatre, we've got music, we've even got product placement. Now, just as I've run through all of those, hopefully you're realizing, of course, that what the measurement of success in an art or a theatre situation or in product placement is going to be completely different from a charitable relationship or a sporting sponsorship. And indeed, even if you look at the picture there of the perimeter board against the shirts, against the fan engagement, the measure of success is going to be different depending on the rights that you've purchased, which of course depends on the problem that you're trying to fix. And I think that there is one enormous challenge in the world of sponsorship, and that is that generally as practitioners, we have a vested interest in success. So that means we're spending, in brands, sponsorship can be one of the biggest expenditures for an organization. As such, there is a vested interest for it to be seen to be successful. Failure with that amount of money is not acceptable. Jobs hang on the success. Sponsorship teams depend on proving that the work they've done is successful. So I think this is the first learning, if you like, is that there is an enormous vested interest in sponsorship working. So bringing in an external expert, people from outside to view the work that you're doing, to bring an external, cold, hard, fact-driven level of measurement is really important. The image here, incidentally, was me asking ChatGPT to draw a picture of people stealing money from each other's wallets. I'm not sure the picture quite worked, but still, close enough. So the challenge then is that we look at a lot of superficial numbers that mean nothing. So take, for example, here, I've just given you a little example. Brand exposure or media equivalent, that these are numbers that are just superficial. They are not really a measure of success. And I'll expand on this in a little bit more detail later on. But this is the problem that we face. We have a vested interest in success, so we grasp at anything that allows us to prove that success. And we know that just having a logo on a top, a media equivalent of $14,595, this is made up, of course, by the way, that's nonsense. No one's going to go and buy that source of space for advertising. And it does not work like that. And we know that it doesn't work like that. And the media equivalent score is trying to put a metric where no metric is really required. So take perimeter boards at a sporting event. Literally, perimeter boards are designed to capture your attention. And if you think of perimeter boards that you see today compared to just 5 years ago when they were static, plain, unmoving, now these are animated LED boards. They flash colors, they tell a story. They are really quite capturing, and they're bright and they're energized. So what they're doing is they are distracting you from what's going on the pitch to look at a perimeter board. Now, is a measure of success, if we start to try and capture these numbers, is a measure of success really to try and stop people from watching and enjoying the sport or the game or whatever it was that they wanted to see? What you can see here on the screen is actually that the technology now allows advertisers to show a different advert on a perimeter board when watching it virtually. They can show a relevant advert to the person who's watching. So this is the same exact moment in time, but with 4 different companies showing an advert depending on who was getting it. Now, it is interruption. It is designed to take your attention away from that experience that you're trying to have. And the big proof point, that the eyes that are captured that brands use to measure the success is, of course, actually just measuring annoyance. It's measuring people having their eye caught to go and look at something else. So my question is, does measuring the screen time and the availability of something like a perimeter board, does it translate into, does it become increased likelihood to buy a product, an increased change in mind in terms of a brand or its brand affinity or the likability of a brand? Does it change how much you might like that brand? And I argue that I don't believe it does. Now, I'll just give you another little example of some of these superficial numbers. So this was back quite a few years ago, one of the World Cup sponsors. And the World Cup sponsor justified their sponsorship by saying there were 6 billion viewers of our brand, and we got 388,000 seconds of brand exposure, as in 4 days. This is perimeter board coverage. That is the equivalent of $18 billion of equivalent advertising value. Now, common sense says having your logo on a perimeter board during a World Cup match, having it spinning and changing with different providers, that is not $18 billion of equivalent value. Okay, so it is a meaningless number. And when you start to think about it like that, you begin to realize just how crazy it sounds. And again, we have vanity metrics such as social media, right? Really important levers to pull, but does someone liking a post on Facebook or on X or on LinkedIn, does that actually change the way that they see your brand or the way that they behave as a result of your brand? Or is it just a top level metric? It's the same with like video views. The number of people that view a video does not necessarily mean that they have changed their mind or their view about your brand or the sponsorship or whatever it is in that context. So I would certainly argue if you're going to use these things, we need to start thinking about putting really harsh weightings on these numbers. And I don't deny these numbers are important levers to understand. If you have a baseline, you can then see and you can compare and you can measure to understand what might be working, what might not be working. But to hang a valuation of a sponsorship or to hang the justification in your money, it is, in my view, a really dangerous thing to do. And here is an example that I can give you. So I got, this was back in my British Gas days, we got a brilliant 2 or 3 page article in one of the biggest newspapers in the United Kingdom about swimming with Tom Daley, one of the most famous divers. And this paper, we got 55 million impressions, my PR agency told me. Now, 55 million impressions is crazy when there were only 61 million UK inhabitants. So somehow or other, we've somehow managed to get more people reading this newspaper than were reading the newspaper, and suddenly all the 10-year-old children were also reading this newspaper. So it became a crazy number. And of course, just it's not about circulation count. You've then got to ask yourself, how many people actually got to that page in the newspaper? How many people then actually read it and consumed and saw that your brand was doing something of value? So we put on a really harsh weighting tool in order to try and measure and understand what the real impact of the media was. And that then gave us, when we were talking about justification, that became really helpful. So I would really think about some of these different issues. These are all the issues in the world of measurement. So when it comes on to strategy, what do I think we need to do? And I genuinely think that the core to what we need to deliver is we need to think of data as a tool to inform rather than to justify. So what that means is if we measure something, it then becomes important. It becomes something that we track and we identify, and it becomes a target that we want to work towards. And if we set ourselves as the only targets of sponsorship as social media metrics, then they become the targets that we cut other things to focus on those targets. So we need to really think about what the targets what we want to achieve are, and then we need to use the data to understand what's working and what isn't, rather than using it to cover our backs, to say we are making, we're doing things in the right way, in the right direction. So, for example, it's like trying to judge the success of a football team by how many people walk past the stadium on match day. Right? That is a silly measure. Okay, it's helpful. You'll get to know what the football's like. You'll get to know how many people are passing by, but it doesn't tell you if the football team is successful. It doesn't tell you if they've watched the match. Right? What the football team actually care about is a fan experience. They care about the ticket sales. They care about winning trophies. The passing traffic does not buy them loyalty. So we've got to use data really cleverly to understand where we're going. And this leads to the absolute fundamental, in my view, in the world of sponsorship. And that is, we need to ask ourselves, what is the business problem that we're trying to fix? And business problems can be anything. It could be sales are declining. It could be employee engagement. It could be customer engagement. It might be brand awareness. It might be brand metrics that are struggling. But if we don't define really clearly what sponsorship is going to try and achieve for the brand, then we're going to go nowhere. And all too often, sponsorship is done because, oh no, we think it's a good thing, or we're a big British brand, so we ought to be sponsoring a big British business. But what is the problem that you're trying to fix? And if you're not really clear on that, you might end up sponsoring when you don't need to sponsor, and above the line advertising could solve the problem, or below the line could solve the problem. Or you end up sponsoring properties that do not give you the assets that would allow you to fix the problem. So if we can understand what the business problem we need to fix is, we can then ask ourselves, is sponsorship the right answer? And is this sponsorship the right answer? And do we have the right rights within this sponsorship to be able to deliver that? So I think this is the number one most important thing for sponsorship practitioners to work on. Now, as I mentioned, if you have a target, it becomes a focus. Excuse me. So if we set business objectives, you'll then work towards them. So we need to work out what is the business problem, and then what are the KPIs that deliver that business problem? What are the things underneath that business problem that might change it? So, for example, if it was you were struggling to get the right customer, then what are the measures of success? Well, it's about, can you segment your customers? Are you looking at the numbers of customers? Are you tracking what their engagement is with your brand? What about sales from that particular side? What are the KPIs that drive that business objective? And then what are those KPIs? What of those problems can sponsorship actually change? And then set out a balanced scorecard along those lines. Because actually, we've got to look at the bigger picture. If we can work out where we're going, we can work out what drives that success, and then what sponsorship can contribute to it, then we're going to have a really impactful sponsorship that will make the difference. And all too often, because that value chain doesn't exist, sponsorships then come to an end because they're seen as frivolous or unnecessary, because they are not delivering something that a business really needs to have fixed. Really simple. And it comes down to understanding the difference between outputs, outcomes, and then the impact. And outputs, as we just discussed, those are the vanity measures, right? They're really important to understand. How many people turned up at the event? How many people, took part in my activation? How many pieces of giveaway T-shirts have I given away that people have taken? Well, they're all important numbers, but they are not success in itself. Right? It is really important then to understand what the outcome we're trying to achieve is, and then what the impact of that outcome might be. The impact is the business problem. The outcome is what sponsorship can drive. So that's what we need to be focusing on. We need to understand the sponsorship deliverables that can impact on the business problem. Whoops, sorry. And you might find, and certainly I have found, that there are always conflicts, because what your board or your director of marketing or your business asks for may not be what you can actually deliver. And I think this is a really difficult situation when the board is saying, but we need to deliver this, and you're left with a set of assets that will not deliver it. And that's a really difficult position to be in. I think you've either got to encourage the board to look at opportunities and ways in which they can see the value that sponsorship can contribute, or you need to try and find the underlying drivers that sponsorship can contribute in order to try and meet those objectives. And I'll give you a little example. So back 8-9 years ago, when I was at British Gas, we had a really strong brand position. We were very well known and we were quite distinctive in the market. But we had an issue with customer retention. We had a number of customers that were churning and leaving every year. We also had a problem with a net promoter score that was low. So the net promoter score is a very American score on the basis of the interaction you've just had. On a score of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this product or service to friends or family? And as you can imagine, this is what we were then brought in with sponsorship. Sponsorship was designed to fix the net promoter score and our retention problem. Now, the net promoter score, as I just said in its definition, is as a result of your last interaction with the brand, how likely are you to recommend them to friends or family? Now, how is sponsorship going to change your last interaction with the brand? Well, that's speaking to someone on a call center. That's engaging with them on the website. That's having someone come out to your house to come and fix an energy problem, a boiler or whatever it is. Sponsorship was the wrong solution to the problem that we were asked to fix. And we then spent quite a lot of time at the beginning trying to figure out, how can we fix these business problems? And we realized we couldn't solve NPS through sponsorship. But what we could do is we could focus on customer retention. We could focus on increasing the brand experience and making the brand experience for those people that were interested and positive in in swimming, which was the sport we sponsored, we could change that. So I had to go back to the board to explain to them that the thing that they had asked us to go and deliver with sponsorship, we were not going to be able to deliver, but we were going to fix another business problem instead. And indeed, that's what we did rather successfully in the end. Which leads me on to the final key point, and it is all about the customer, the client, the consumer, right? You've got to understand who the customer is, and segment that audience, because we're talking about sport. So you've got two different matrices of customer. You'll have your own customer segmentation for your own business, your brand, but you've also got to think about the sport that you're sponsoring and their customer segmentation, because they will have key fans. They'll have highly engaged people, they'll have less engaged people, they'll have people who attend, they'll have people who just watch and pay superficial attention. So you've got to think about where your key customer segment overlap with a sports and a fans customer segment, and really understand where there are overlaps and where there aren't. And one of the key strategies that we took at British Gas was understanding who the customer were, really measuring them, and then spotting which was the customer segment that had the greatest potential, so which was the fan segment that had the greatest potential to grow. And if we grew that fan segment, they also correlated with a key growth area for our business. So we then invested our time and energy into growing one of the fan segments. And by growing the fan segment, we then had the halo effect onto British Gas. Now, it was a slightly tenuous story because, as you can imagine, actually, it's really quite difficult. We're an energy company. So trying to change that story is very, very difficult. And as I say, audiences are really complex. And here is an example that we broke down. So this was looking at people who are interested, and I'm using swimming here just because I've used it through the presentation, so it keeps it simple. These are the people who participated in swimming. So we had 18.5 million people who were not interested and were not fans of the sport. Okay, easy. Don't try and change their minds necessarily. If they're not interested, they are not going to buy into our swimming messaging. They're not going to buy into the story that we're telling. Then we've got observers. So these are people for whom it's a passing interest. Maybe during the Olympic Games, it's a sport that they suddenly go, oh, okay, I'm now quite interested in it. So we have the opportunity with observers to try and convert them from being just an Olympic follower to maybe I'll follow them a little bit more. Maybe I'll look at the national championships to try and make them a follower. As you can see, 7 million people were followers. They were people who it was one of the sports that they had an interest in and they cared in. And our strategy then became to really focus on those followers because they were the ones who already had a high interest in the sport, and we could then talk to them and engage with them and talk to them about something that they cared about, trying to get more people up through that funnel so that we were then engaging with them. So when we do that, suddenly you can start to say, okay, I now know who I'm talking to and I know what I want to achieve. I know what my business problem is. So we can then measure what counts. Right? So what is it that matters? What is the audience group that I want to measure? What is it that I want them to try and get better about? And we do, and this is just a random selection of metrics just to give some examples, but what is it? And our measure was if we can show that we're getting more families, so our key market segment we wanted to grow were families. So if we could get more families to be interested in swimming, then that's more people who would then be exposed to the proposition that we offer in terms of the sport, in terms of the engagement, in terms of the participation. So there are more people that would see the work that we do, that would have first-hand experience of it. So they would then be more proud of sport, etc., etc. So we were trying to create that value chain, and no word of a lie, it's really difficult. And certainly we did not get it completely right. But with the benefit of hindsight, I can definitely see how I would have done it again. And I'll just leave you with a couple of short thoughts. Now, we gave away, again, I'm taking this swimming theme all the way through, we gave away 1.5 million free swims to the people of Britain. We did it 3 times, 2009, 2010, and 2012. We gave away 1.5 million free swims. Now, that sounds brilliant, right? What an amazing number. 1.5 million people swimming. That's incredible. Well, that was a number that I shared with the board. Now, with hindsight, did we get people swimming more often? Well, we had 1.5 million people took a free swim. So maybe not. Maybe they just took that one free swim and we didn't change behaviors. Did we shift brand engagement? I don't know. They just took a free swim. Did it change their mind? Did it change their view? Did it do anything extra for them having gratitude towards us? Possibly not. Yeah, did we drive brand reappraisal? Did people see us in a different light as a result of the work that we did? Yeah, you know what? It's a good question. I don't think we did. Did we see an uplift in sales as a result of providing a free swim? Hand on heart, we didn't look, we didn't count, we didn't care. Now, these are things with the benefit of hindsight that you look back and you go, well, these are really obvious questions to now ask. And it's so easy when you're caught up in the glamour and the fun of the sponsorship that you're doing that you can miss that business problem. And I think that's what we then come back to. My final slide, we need to focus on the outcome that's important. What is the business problem? We need to remember the customer, and it's all about the customer and the fan and thinking about who it is and what we want to do with them. And then finally, that is then what we measure. And we can be really specific in terms of understanding the measurements that are required. So I hope that's interesting. I hope it's a little bit of food for thought for you. Thank you very much. Back to you, Gina.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Very interesting presentation. Many lessons to learn. Even the best sometimes have room for improvement, right?
Always.
I have a couple of questions. Many of the topics that you touch upon we discuss in class with our sponsorship students and also metric students, marketing metric students. And you started with what I typically start my lectures, that there is no golden bullet, there is no silver metric. Is there any set of metrics that, despite the fact that they're not golden per se, you would definitely suggest to sponsorship managers to address and evaluate?
So again, it comes back to the business problem you're trying to fix, because if sales isn't the thing that you're trying to chase, then understanding the impact of sponsorship on sales is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. But I think ultimately what is important is to have a really good baseline knowledge and understanding of the asset that you're sponsoring. So who are the fans and what's important to them? What is their demographic makeup? What are the drivers that make them interested in the sport? So I think those are the really important. You've got to have a baseline measure to be able to step it up and then see whether or not the work you're doing is successful. But genuinely, I think it really, really depends on what your aims are. And ultimately, take, for example, if you're a new brand and no one knows who you are, then sponsorship can be a brilliant tool to get you in front of millions and millions of people with not necessarily knowing who you are or what you do, but your name will become really familiar. Now, I would not necessarily endorse that as a cost-effective strategy, but it's definitely a strategy. And if you do that, then actually, understanding some of your PR coverage, knowing that you're getting visibility, maybe those are the important metrics to you. And I guess this is what it comes down to. So long as you can define what you're trying to achieve and how sponsorship can help you, then actually all these measures can be valid.
Thank you so much. I have another question about the media equivalence. You have brought examples and that reflect how media equivalence can be a very distorted and flawed metric. Nonetheless, it's quite commonly applied, and it is still commonly applied. Given the fact that especially younger audiences are now multitasking, they have a much shorter attention of span, how can we weight the scores to provide a somewhat accurate media equivalence metric?
So I am completely against media equivalent metrics. I don't see the value that they contribute, because what all it is doing is trying to say, look how brilliant this coverage is. I've got X million dollars worth of free advertising. But that's not how it works, because if you've got a photograph, it's not a photograph of your brand. It's a photograph of someone wearing your brand really, really, really small. So it's not really a media equivalence at all. And again, it's your name might be mentioned in an article, but again, you might get mentioned once if you're really lucky somewhere in the text. So if we start column counting, then again, we've missed the impact. Is this story, and this is what I was talking about putting a weighted metric on, is this story clearly about me and my brand? Does it land my brand messages? Does it change people's perception of my brand? And if the answer to those three is no, not really, then what benefit have I got from that particular piece of PR? So my personal, I think, of course, it's really important. We have to try and create measures somewhere. So I have no issue, and we do. Obviously, we look at share of voice, and we'll look at the media measurement and media equivalency. But I do that in terms of trying to determine, am I getting this year versus last year? How are we doing in terms of the coverage that we're getting? What I absolutely do not do is report then on that as a success measure. I think that undermines what I'm trying to achieve.
Very interesting. Another topic of discussion that we frequently come across pertains to the big data. We now have so many sources of secondary data through social media, through online streams, which is assumed to be a wealth, especially as compared to 10 years ago. How can marketeers actually leverage on this wealth?
So I think, as ever, I think marketeers may not be the right people to leverage that wealth. I think marketeers need to have stronger relationships with the data scientists, with the insight leaders who can. And our job as marketeers, in my view, is to ask the punchy question, to ask, create a hypothesis. I think that this is the case. Can the data prove or refute what I think? And I think our job is to ask those intelligent questions to try and find the piece of insight. And yeah, I am not particularly data savvy, but I am very good at thinking about what my audience might be interested in. I can see the market, I understand the market, and I then need someone else's help. So I think our job is to build those relationships, find the opportunities, and ask the questions, and be relentless in asking the question to reach an answer that actually adds value. And just asking pointless questions is it's very tempting. Oh, wouldn't it be interesting if we just could find out a little bit about this topic? But actually, what is the insight that I'm trying to unlock? What is the problem that this is then going to fix? Do I have a marketing campaign in mind? Do I have a solution in mind? What am I trying to back this up with? So I think it's really exciting that we've got all this data. I think technologies such as artificial intelligence are going to help us now cut through and start to test these hypotheses more and more. And I've got loads in my mind that I think customers do this because, and I have no way of proving that other than speaking to customers. And fine, I can ask 10 customers, but 10 customers is not a data set you can make a decision on.
And you're passing the ball for the next question. Artificial intelligence and how this can inform and help our jobs within sponsorship. How do you see the future?
So without doubt, AI is going, it is transforming marketing. And I was talking about this just yesterday. And I think the question I was asked was, how is AI going to transform sponsorship? And if I'm honest, I couldn't come up with an answer because I couldn't differentiate sponsorship from marketing. So I think the right question is actually, how is AI going to change marketing? because ultimately it's the campaign creation, it's the audience selection, it's the analysis of the results that we get back, it's the writing of copy. That is the stuff that is going to add enormous value. It's going to take away swathes of time and work that we invest in generating this material. Specifically into sponsorship, I really struggled to think about how AI was going to benefit in a solely sponsorship context. I think it is, yeah, and as sponsorship practitioners, and this is the joy, this is why sponsorship is so interesting. We are masters of all the marketing metrics, right? Of the whole marketing mix. We do advertising, we do below the line emails, we do activation, we do every single bit of the marketing mix from a sponsorship point of view. So actually, we are going to massively benefit in terms of creating. I just think back to the number of emails we used to write. Certainly, I think sponsorship proposals will probably get hopefully a lot better. If you can imagine being able to summarize your sponsorship pitch and then summarize the business that you're pitching to, and then ask an AI engine to merge those two together and create the list of things that are going to be important. I think we're going to see that the quality of some of the sales pitches that I receive are going to go up because all too often the sales pitches I receive are very one-dimensional. It's here is my story and I tell this to everyone in the same way. And my feedback is always, it's lovely, but I'm afraid I'm not interested in your story. I'm interested in my story and how you're going to help my story and my customers. So I'm really excited. I think AI does that really, really well. Obviously, it needs a human to sit on top of it and rewrite it and tell the story effectively. But I think we're going in a really exciting direction.
That's a really exciting direction. Have you seen and have you been using AI? Have you been incorporating in projects that you're currently running?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use it. I'll summarize. So my job is broader than sponsorship. I look after brand and communications. So one of the key tools that I now use is in our private large language model. So it's not a publicly available one. I will upload the value proposition for one of our products, right? Quite a long, like 2 pages of A4 of a value proposition. And then I will ask the AI engine to write me an email on the following topic. And it will then write a really, really good first draft sales email or marketing email or a follow-up email based on that value proposition. And that's the sort of stuff that people like me would spend hours agonizing over. How do I structure this? Which bit of the product do I need to talk about? AI has, and it's the first draft is good. It's not outstanding, it's good. And as ever, like most human beings, it's so much easier to critique and rewrite someone else's work than it is to start with a blank sheet of paper.
That's actually true. This is a part that we know as well as reviewing the job of others. It's much easier. A last question that is frequently discussed: secondary data are readily available. They can be processed, especially when databases are integrated and when data scientists are also included and well collaborating with the sponsorship department. What about the primary data? Do you see them becoming obsolete?
So it's an interesting question. So I've always worked in highly regulated businesses where actually secondary data is a high risk, and bringing in another company or even third-party data, bringing it in becomes something that the business is generally not willing to do. And certainly within Europe with GDPR, it becomes if you don't own the data, if you can't work out exactly where it's come from, then a lot of businesses, certainly in the United Kingdom, are very nervous about sharing that information. So I think it's an interesting question, interesting thought, not one I've really considered. But ultimately, so long as we're not getting personally identifiable information, then if we can, the more data we have, the better, and the more we can interrogate that data, the better. The challenge is always what happens when the data conflicts, when you have 2 different sources of data telling you 2 very different stories. And as ever, I literally just been doing it this week. we've done a big brand survey. You've got to understand the bias in your data. And we sent out the questionnaire to our mailing list. Well, guess what? Our mailing list is greatest majority customers. So if they're a customer of us, then they are automatically going to have a better awareness of us. They're going to have they're going to use our product. If they use our product, they're going to like us more anyway because they use our product. So there is a built-in bias, and it's one of the big risks, certainly in sponsorship, particularly who are you asking the question of? And you can do big omnibus surveys, that's fine. But then if you ask, are you aware of our sponsorship? As a result of the sponsorship, are you more positive about us? Suddenly, you've just, if they're aware of the sponsorship, they're aware of your brand. And if they're aware of you, then they probably automatically like you more because they're aware. You're in their mind and they can recall you. So there is a huge amount of bias in data. And I think a big part of our job is recognizing that bias and recognizing when you can't compare data set A with data set B, but you can use both simultaneously. And I think that is a real skill that I'm certainly learning. And I think our industry will continue to evolve over time.
That is a true issue. We have not resolved this even in academic research, and the understanding our biases both as customers, as marketeers, as sponsorship managers is the #1 rule. One last question, if I may, and this relates to the sports management students, sports marketing students, new professionals in the industry who want to learn what are the skills that will be required for them to craft and sustain a successful professional career. What's your take on that?
Sure. So I am unique. I have no interest in sport. None whatsoever. I don't have a football team. I have zilch, not a bit. And as a result, the reason I believe I've been successful is because I'm a marketeer. I understand marketing and business. That is my job. I understand channels. I look to understand customers and what the problem is. Sponsorship or sports, whatever it is an asset that we are using. So my recommendation would be, remember the theory, the marketing theory. Don't get blinkered by the joys and excitement of sport. Well, think about, who is this athlete? Okay, I want to sponsor this athlete. Great. Who are they? What is their fanship? What am I going to do with them? Ask the really obvious questions that you would if it was someone you'd never heard of before and they weren't a celebrity. It's so easy to assume that your knowledge is the nation's knowledge. And I think it's the quickest undoing, is realizing that actually you've just been convinced by something that was glamorous and you've missed the core corporate business strategy. So focus on the business, focus on understanding your marketing and the theory around marketing, and then apply the sponsorship level on top. And I think you'll then thrive far, far faster and with much greater success.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leopold, dear Matthew. It has been a pleasure having you at the Front Runners in Sports Management 5.0. Our conversations and your presentations are always so enriching and insightful. We have very much enjoyed it. And again, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.